Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com with part 2 to my Property Rights 101. So in the last video, we kind of discussed the case for property rights. So again, to summarize, the case for property rights it's a system for kind of discovering who should get what property in a world of scarce resources. But by doing it through sort of the traditional sort of property rights framework where it's basically first the most senior claim gets the right to the property, and then it's exchanged freely between consenting transactions. You, maximize happiness, incentivize innovation, and help outline responsibility. But there's a lot of criticisms of that system. So one criticism is time, in the sense that over time, everything that is out there gets claimed. So maybe if we're talking about land, eventually there'll be no more land to claim. So this puts people who are of future generations who did not have the opportunity, did not exist to be able to claim unclaimed land at a disadvantage. So if you born in a family line that didn't get to claim property in early generations, you're at a disadvantage than those families that did. And there's truth to that. There's that you know, depending on the wealth that your family has accumulated, you're going to have certain privileges that others won't. But that is not your fault, and it's not something you can't overcome. Because the one thing that everybody gets is a monopoly on themselves, a monopoly on their labor, in the sense that you're the only one who has the ability to exchange your labor. So basically, and then also over time, the value of different types of capital change. Okay, basically the value of human capital, meaning the knowledge that you have and the skills that you have, are more valuable than ever, because the kind of skills you need nowadays in a lot of the kind of industries of today are things like programming, a lot less physical based, a lot more knowledge and skill based, things that require individuals to take time to hone skills, versus land, while always a scarce resources, has become less necessary in terms of success. Retail stores are a thing of the past. A lot of the commercial space we need now, since we do commerce over the internet, have become less so. So the disadvantage of not having access to land is less so, in the sense that, again, to start your business, whether it's in retail, consulting, whatnot, the startup costs are minimal, and there's now the value of the capital in terms of human capital are greater than necessarily the terms in physical capital, as far as machinery and whatnot in many business lines, giving you people much more opportunity to overcome sort of that barrier of, let's say, less unclaimed land. To the extent that land is a problem, oftentimes it's artificial. Because if you had, let's say, freer markets, where basically you had less government supports of dying industries, of limiting the uses of property, you would have a lot of shift. A lot of those commercial properties that can't find retail business for them could be easily transformed into housing to provide more housing at affordable costs. If zoning rules were deregulated, then you'd be able to create more units of housing with the same amount of space. So that way you'd also, again, have more affordable housing. So on the housing side, because there are more people, so you need more housing, the other competing uses of land have shifted. That there should be a lot of the land that's currently being used available for, and then also you need less land for necessarily producing food. Okay, with the technology advances over the last 100 years, you can produce a lot more food with a lot less space. We feed a lot more people. There's a lot less people starving around the world today than ever. So over time, the use of land changes, the need of land changes. So even though the availability of land has changed, the economic hurdle that truly has become a lot less. Now with the sort of the grander world of sort of human capital and sort of a lot of today's enterprises. But this places a premium on education. But access to education is greater. So even if there's issues with schools and the quality of schools and access to quality of schools, education is not just necessarily about schooling. With the internet and all sorts of types of the internet gives you access to education, the ability to develop that human capital to an extent that never existed before, and the value of that human capital is at a premium that didn't exist before. So things change, and again, the relative values of these types of capital have changed with it in a way that actually does sort of balance it if all things were, again, in a more freer market that didn't create some of the restrictions on land use that have created sort of some imbalance in pricing and imbalances in wealth that otherwise would not exist. The other big criticism is the criticism sort of unoccupied lands. You'll have some people say, hey, if you own property like a house, and it's not a house that you live in, it's just a house that you rent out to other people, and no one's using it, that you shouldn't have ability to own that piece of property because you're not using it. That's like saying that if you go grocery shopping and you buy food for the week, because you're not eating it today, people can take the food you bought for the rest of the week. There's a reason people buy more than they need now. It's an investment in your future. So in the terms of food, you buy that there because there may be a day that you don't have time to go out and buy food for that day. In the terms of housing, it may be a backup house, it may be a house to generate income. But here's the cool thing about that. Because you can generate income off the extra housing units that you own, you have an incentive to create more housing units. Okay, instead of having a single family home, you might build a duplex because you can rent out that second unit of housing. So that is a good thing, and that's a good incentive because people can own things that are not being used at the time, and it allows people to plan for the future. Okay, so in bottom line is rent is not theft. Now the third criticism is about sort of unfair claims. So this is the idea that, okay, well now again, all the property's now been sort of claimed for the most part, and some of those claims may have come on sort of unfair terms. Someone might have stolen land from somebody else, and now generations have passed by, and that family line has benefited, and the family lines of the people whose property was stolen by whatever means, because again, documentation and the means of keeping track of these things weren't as good 100 years ago or 200 years ago, they're at a disadvantage. Should that sort of injustice be ignored? At the end of the day, there is an element that you have to prove that an injustice occurred. You have to be able to prove the document somehow that there was an unjust exchange of property, that there wasn't a voluntary exchange, and then you can get you can get what's the word I'm looking for? Reparations for that. But okay, that means the person who's, let's say, 3 generations ago, your family's property was stolen. Now that property was sold to another person through a just transaction, but because the original transaction was unjust, now you're able to go reclaim that land. You can do that, theoretically, if you have the proper documentation to prove the original sort of unjust transaction. But now that other person then has a claim on the person who they bought the property from, and it's never always very clean because you're not always able to get the reparations you deserve out of it. So there is no world where you can have perfect justice because they're just for the same reason why you need property rights. There's scarcity. And oftentimes those who create injustice, those who take unjust actions in society, they do so, and then they create injustice because they don't have the resources to fully pay off the liability of the injustice they created. But you do the best you can. I mean, this is the reason why you have court systems and you have adjudication, because it's not always simple, and the best way to kind of clear up the situation is always clear. So this is why you need judges and legal systems, and you want market forces there too, because again, like anything else, competition keeps people honest. But these are things that'll happen in any kind of property rights system where things can be taken and not just sort of this sort of standard traditional property rights framework. So those are sort of 3 main criticisms I usually hear: sort of the intergenerational availability of unclaimed resources, the occupancy issue or unoccupied space issue, and 3, the unjust transfers issue. They are, for the most part, they work themselves out.